Hi, my name is Shyamalan, and during this demonstration I'm going to go through my thought process and the challenges that I face when I don't have a clear idea or a brief of what I'm actually going to be painting. Often the urge to draw or paint is greater than any idea or concept I have. Many times, as I'm sure others have too, I'm faced with a blank canvas with no real fixed idea but the desire to paint something. For me, I'm faced with either doing small exploratory sketches and seeing where that takes me, and how that would lead into a more complete colour rough. Sometimes, like this sketch, the desire to paint something beyond the drawn line captures me and I just have to paint. It starts with removing the white and blocking in a rough sky. I'm painting the sky in an applied way to suggest movement, but in a way that could take a different direction if an interesting shape appears. Generally, I tend to fall into subjects or topics that I really enjoy to paint. That natural and normal starting point for me is landscapes or environmental pieces, and so this sketch starts in this same way. At this stage, nothing new develops or appears beyond the sky. I continue using a blend of the colours using hard and soft edge brushes to create distinctions between areas to imply shape and depth. Using techniques such as hard against soft, light against dark, warm against cold really helps separate and define shapes and edges within a piece. The use of colour at this stage helps me push or pull the clouds and sky backwards and forwards. The slightly darker tones help to add form and shadow, while the higher, warmer tones help bring them forward. I'm now thinking a low angle of viewing for the scene might make an interesting composition. Again, nothing at this stage is set. I have no clear direction, no rough lines or sketch, and the sky could easily be covered with the subject matter that develops through the sketch. Mountains and rock structures feature heavily in my personal work. I'm drawn to mountains and nature and take every opportunity to include them. I'm originally from the Lake District in the UK, and having such a magnificent landscape to enjoy and marvel at, I look to reconnect with through my art. I approach rock structures or mountains in the same way. I paint the basic shape and a mid-tone to establish the shape only, using various custom brushes to build up the texture of the rock on a locked layer. I apply various tones of colour too to indicate shadow and highlighted areas. Using custom brushes helps speed up the process, but also add an element of randomness to the painted match, which I really enjoy working with. This process is to simply fill the shape with random texture and colour. I try to alter the temperature of the colours between the shadow and the highlighted areas to help differentiate them. The general approach I take is I apply cooler colours in the shadow areas and the warmer highlighted areas to help the contrast in the shape. Once I have a random amount of texture and colour, I take a simple round brush and begin to shape the structure, colour picking from the object to stay within the same colour range and the same temperature range. This process is the most enjoyable part, taking a flat shape and painting the lines and faces of the object to give it depth and structure. I want to give the impression that the rock structure is large, and so applying a soft blue wash over the top helps push the object back and provide space between the two structures. The further an object gets from our view, the less colour and saturation we see, and so to help give the impression, blue is added to help push that object back into the space. Adding atmospheric elements really help divide between the background, the middle ground and the foreground. It helps separate and push and pull objects within the scene. The way this can be achieved is by applying a really soft airbrush of a light blue colour. The reason blue is used is because the atmosphere scatters blue light. When we look at distant objects, such as a mountain range, we can see through the blue light scattered in the air, which gives the objects in the distance that blue colour. I've decided that the rock structure will be the vanishing point, the area that the viewer will be directed into. The other composition elements haven't yet been decided, but the sketch is still very open, with a lot of negative space to the right. I'm starting to explore the narrative of the sketch. I know the composition needs a foreground element, and the right side is still really open. The idea of a lone person approaching the rock structure filling that foreground takes shape in my head, but the emptiness of the centre of the sketch and the composition really shows. It's now that I know that that area needs addressing, I don't want the centre coming forward, and so I start to explore background elements that will help fill this area. I use the same approach as before: base colour, texture on top, and then shape the structures. I decided to explore the idea of repeating the structures to help give some scale and depth to the piece. One issue with this direction is immediately it reduces the scale of the closer rock towers, and so to keep the impression of towering structures, I need to paint them larger. As the figure is closer to the viewer, more details will be shown. There'll be a higher contrast and saturation of colours, which will help create depth and separation within the piece. The figure is roughed out, this time from darkest to light. Implied design cues are used to try and set the scene and answer some of the questions in the piece. I try and include questions in my work for the viewer. I don't want it to be all explained, but raise questions of what the figure may be doing, why they are there, are they heading to safety or impending doom. I'm an electrical engineer by profession and tend to approach subjects from a practical angle and ask myself, does it make sense? Would it work? Those design cues fall into the same mindset and pull from my experience and background working in various industries. Adding atmospheric elements such as dust, smoke, the blur of fabric, the implied movement of wind, helps imply movement within a piece and stops it feeling stagnant and flat. Even though this is a colour sketch, I want to push the levels of depth and answer some of the questions of the piece itself, so that when it goes into the next stages, it helps answer some of those questions that it may have. The foreground and the figure have the highest values or the darkest values in tone. This helps bring them forward in the piece and push everything backwards. It's at this stage that I start to add more narrative to the piece and certainly questions within the piece itself. Adding of the green lights raises more questions within the piece and gives it that out-of-world feel. There are still compositional issues with the sketch that need answering fully before this moves into the final work, but I now have a starting point with an established idea that wasn't there previously with the blank page. Thank you for watching.